The chant you hear in the background is in the Maori language, and this episode features Olive, one of over 5,000 people from Aotearoa, New Zealand, living in Tasmania, and over 500,000 in Australia as a whole. Now, Olive's journey from around Gisborne on the North Island of New Zealand to Tasmania via Melbourne is one that features both trauma, family, reconnecting with culture, and finding not only a new physical home, but also a spiritual home away from home in Tasmania, where Olive continues to honour and maintain the traditions and practices of her ancestors. Also at the end, you'll hear an explanation of the meaning of this Maori chant. So please tune in to learn more about Maori culture and Olive's journey to be here in Lutruwita, Tasmania.
My name is Olive Clark. I am from Gisborne, which is a small town on the east coast of the North Island of New Zealand. I am Maori, and my ancestral lines connect me to the tribes of Ngāti Porou, Ngāti Kahungunu, Te Atanga Mahaki, and Runga Whakata. I currently live in Pelham, Hobart, Tasmania. So I was born in 1981. I'm 44 years old. Growing up in the 80s, I think, was quite an amazing time. I think as a child, there was a lot of freedom. There was a lot of happiness in my childhood. So from the age of birth until 6 years old, I grew up in a small town just outside of Gisborne called Matawai. There were no takeouts. There were no, you had to live off the land. My father was a farmer. He killed the meat that we needed. They hunted for what we needed. It was a happy childhood. I had 3 brothers and 3 sisters, so I'm the second youngest of 7 children. Okay. And then Cyclone Bowler hit in 1988 when I was 7 years old. And then we had to relocate from that rural location further inland where it was safe because the area was quite flooded and basically unlivable.
Like, what are your memories of that as a child?
I loved growing up in Matawai. Those were the days where the rural school bus would come and collect us for school, and one of my older sisters actually had a pet goat, and she would bring the goat on the school bus, take it to school. We'd feed it on lunch breaks and things like that, and then take it home. So those are the sorts of memories that I grew up with, just playing in nature, playing with my siblings, playing with neighbours down the road, their children. There wasn't anything outside of that community at that age for me, so It was a really happy childhood.
Yeah, so it sounds like it was quite a connected community that you
Yes, it was a very small community from what I remember, and also a very welcoming community. So if someone had a birthday in the area, the entire community was invited. So that's something that we don't see anymore in a lot of communities, which I would love to see again.
And the people in the area, were they all similarly Maori, or was it a sort of mixed culture?
It was a mixed culture. So my father, growing up, predominantly worked on cattle stations, working as a general hand, which involved many jobs like shearing sheep, fencing around the property, killing meat, because he grew up working in freezing works there, which is like a meat works. Yeah, so once we moved from there, we moved to another cattle station that was inland, and I lived there until the age of 16. So I never tried takeouts until the age of 11, for example, for the first time. So we were a lot closer to, I guess, the modern things of life, such as watching TV. That was not something that we grew up with. We didn't grow up with a TV, for example, until we moved further inland. It was quite different in a lot of ways.
When you were at school, what did you think you were likely to be doing later in life? Like, was there some sort of plan forming?
Yes, when I was younger, I always wanted to be a teacher. Okay. And I did actually get accepted into Teachers College at the end of high school, but my mum passed away that very same year, so I didn't have the funding to continue with that. So I didn't pursue my career in teaching, and rather went on to have children and pursue other aspects of passions right now, but that wasn't always the case through my 20s and 30s.
So obviously, big life event changes, your direction in life. What were you thinking you were going to do instead when you found you couldn't go and teach?
Well, at that time, I was actually just in a traumatic frame of space. I think when you lose a crucial person in your life at such a young age, you do turn to tools that are not healthy for you. So alcoholism was certainly something that I took on as a tool through my young age, and it's taken me many years to get to where I am now, where I no longer drink alcohol, for example. I don't use that as a tool anymore. I have other tools that I use. So I think through my trauma, it's helped me to reconnect to my culture, because my mum was my connection to my culture. We predominantly grew up around what we call a marae. So a marae is like a meeting house for tribes. My mum was heavily involved with her marae, and we spent a lot of our childhood on the marae learning what we call tikanga. So tikanga is like the protocols of your tribe, the do's or the don'ts, if you like, learning knowledge and oral history of where you come from. So when that disconnection happened with my mum passing away quite abruptly, because it was unexpected, I guess I just spiralled into a world of trauma and disconnection. And my father remarried, came here to Australia, and I followed after him because I wanted to be near my father. And at that time, all of my siblings were here in Australia as well. I feel that my family is quite a close family, more so before my mum passed away. But when something like that happens in any family, of course, you tend to isolate yourself and try and figure out who you are. I guess at a young age, I was only 16 years old when my mother passed away. So there's the physical things that you have to deal with, such as the job that my dad had was working on a cattle station. So as long as he was working on that cattle station, we had a roof over our head, for example. Once he finished on that cattle station, it was, we had to go out there and feed ourselves and look after yourselves, as you do as you grow into an adult. So I spent a lot of years doing things that, taught me lessons to get to where I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I could have got there a lot sooner, if that makes sense.
Why did they move to Australia initially?
So my eldest sister, Marianne, was actually the first to migrate to Australia, and that was not long after my mother passed away. And then my grandmother actually passed away a couple of months after my mother's mother. So we went through a stage of quite a few deaths in our family in 1 year. So when I talk about the trauma, we had my mother pass away. A few months after that, my grandmother passed away. And then a few months after that, my sister Marianne, her daughter who had Down syndrome, was on a heart surgery list and didn't get that donor in time. So she passed away, and they all passed away in the same year. So it was quite
that's a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot at that time, yeah.
Yeah, especially for when you're only 16, that's a lot to process, just
Yes.
from one family death,
Yes.
let alone a kind of a cascading number of traumas, I
Yes,
suppose.
well, I grew up looking to my mum and my grandmother as my role models, so
Okay. Yeah, because I was going to ask what were your influences, your main influences when you were young?
Definitely my mother. So the work that I do now, so I'm a Maori practitioner. So Maori in my culture means life force energy. So under that work, I practice with the rongoa, which is plant medicine, romi, which is body work. And these are all modalities that my mother practiced when she was alive. So I have fond memories of my mother having her own medicine shed outside where she would dry all the plants and create all the oils and tinctures. So that has always been a seed implanted in me. My grandmother at that time, she was part of what we call the kohanga reo movement in New Zealand. So our language was suppressed for a very long time after colonisation. We had a number of acts that went through government, like the Tohunga Suppression Act in 1901, which lasted for many years, which meant that the work that I do now, I would never have been able to practice it back then because it was against the law. So my grandmother was part of the revitalisation of our language. And growing up also she ran classes, cultural classes and language classes, which is part of what I do now as well. I run cultural language classes in Baghdad here in Tasmania for homeschooling communities that are interested in learning more about the Māori culture and Māori language from a children's perspective. Because I won't say that I'm an expert in my language, it's an evolving thing through my reconnection, but I certainly, through my homeschooling with my son Zane, who's 6 years old, I would like him to, being disconnected from New Zealand, at least have access to our culture and our language.
And so when did you actually come to Australia?
So I immigrated to Australia in 2008. I was pregnant with my second child at that time. And as I mentioned earlier, I immigrated because I wanted to be close to my dad. So I moved straight from New Zealand to Melbourne, where I lived for 17 years before immigrating here to Tasmania in February of this year.
And so, quite a bit of a jump to somewhere like Melbourne, I guess. So I was wondering, what was that transition like for you?
Oh, well, I had visited Melbourne a couple of times to see my family because I had an older sister living here at that time and my dad was living here as well, in Melbourne, sorry. So I had a little bit of a taste of what to expect, and I guess it was an escape. For me, it was an escape at that time of living in the trauma that I was living in, seeing myself spiralling, I guess, through not coping or dealing with the losses that I had suffered in my teenage years. And then I actually found out a week before I flew out that I was pregnant with my second child. Okay. So I moved over to Melbourne pregnant.
And was it a big adaptation process, I suppose, moving from New Zealand, relative, smallish city, I suppose, to a big city in Australia?
Definitely challenging, quite foreign in regards to dealing with government systems and agencies. Not actually realising the extent of what I needed to do before I moved over here. I just saw that my family were here and I wanted to be with them. But I wasn't, in my younger 20s, I wasn't looking at, how do I prepare myself? Am I eligible for anything, for example, for assistance? So being quite naive in that space. And there's a lot of education about Kiwis immigrating to Australia now. So there's lots of agencies and people out there that give advice and direction of what you should do before you come here, which is not something that I'd done when I first moved to Australia.
And would you say it was a successful escape in the end?
At that time, yes. Especially finding out that I was pregnant a week before moving, because I had the support of my family with me through that pregnancy. And to be honest, when I did move, it was actually a week before the Black Saturday, so that where the fires hit in Victoria, and that was very eye-opening. Moving here with hot weather, I could just remember every day being like 43 or something like that, something ridiculous that I've never experienced since that year that I moved to Australia. And then just seeing the loss of life only a week after migrating here was quite horrific. What
brought you to Tasmania? What's the story?
Yeah, I can give you the physical reasons why I migrated to Tasmania, but there's also a much deeper spiritual reason as to why I migrated to Tasmania. So I can start with the physical reasons. Our older children have grown up, they're moving on with their lives in Melbourne, and we needed to look at downsizing, living in a 5-bedroom home, just working in corporate jobs that we just didn't feel fulfilled in. So it was time to downsize, time to really do what we want to do, and the options were Aotearoa, New Zealand or Tasmania. We made the decision to move to Tasmania because my husband was born here, his parents live here, his brother and his sister live here, his grandmother lives here. The more spiritual reason for myself, when I first met my husband 10 years ago, I didn't know he was from Tasmania, and I actually told him, my ancestors have told me that I'm one day going to be living in Tasmania. And this was before I knew that he was from Tasmania. And he said, I'm from Tasmania. And I said, well, you might have a chance. So, yeah, I have a connection with my ancestors where they can speak to me. I do see them and I do feel them. They haven't told me why I've come here, but since then I've received a further clarification from them that I'm here to raise my son Zane in a way that will uphold and assist the people here when the time comes. So I'll only say that. I won't go any deeper than that.
How did you meet your husband in the first place?
Oh, okay. So we met in Melbourne 10 years ago at a Catch a Fire concert. So Catch a Fire is a well-known Maori Kiwi band, and they were touring in Melbourne at the time, and I met him at a concert there.
How did it go from there, I suppose?
Oh, it was just like most new relationships, a very instant attraction. But I was fairly hard on him at that time, being a single mother. I was quite heavily involved in a lot of community organisations like sports, cultural groups, community groups, and Daniel basically had to book an appointment to go on a date with me, I guess. And because I had gone through a series of, I guess, toxic relationships through my own way of living, I just didn't want to take that next step, having children, without really truly getting to know somebody. So I made him jump through hoops. Yeah.
Okay.
He's a very genuine, kind person, and that's what attracted him to me the most. But our first date was actually at 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning, walking around Cherry Lakes, which is a park in Western Melbourne. So I knew he was a keeper when he met me at that time.
Yeah.
Because it was the only time that I could have that one-on-one with him.
How much did you know about Tasmania before you came here?
Yeah, I'd never been to Tasmania before meeting my husband Daniel. I had heard from family members that had visited Tasmania that it was very similar to Aotearoa, to New Zealand. The natural landscapes and even the wairua, like the spiritual feeling of this place. And it was somewhere that I had always wanted to travel to. There were only a couple of places when I moved to Melbourne that I really wanted to go in Australia, and Tasmania was one of them, and also Northern Territory.
Okay.
So I haven't been to Northern Territory yet, so that's on the list.
But did you find that it was similar to New Zealand as people said, or were there notable differences?
No, I would definitely say that when I first stepped foot on the land itself, I felt a deep connection to my home away from home. It truly felt like a home away from home. Yeah, I had that same sensation of it being familiar in some way and a welcoming feeling, even though I know the history of what's happened here as well.
Tell me a bit more about what your plan was when you came to Tasmania.
Oh, well, since COVID, my husband and I have actually had a plan to transition out of corporate lifestyle, corporate life. The plan was always for me to be the first one out of the both of us to transition out of working full-time. It was always my dream to homeschool my children. We didn't have that opportunity with our 5 older children due to being in the system where you have to pay mortgage and bills and things like that. But yeah, right now I'm doing what I love doing. I'm spending every day with my son. I'm getting to teach him not only my culture, but he's connecting with his father's culture here in Tasmania and learning about them and who they are, because we haven't spent a lot of time with his family. And yeah, it's just a beautiful place. I want it to stay this way. I know there's a lot of, we spoke earlier about people wanting to move away from here and move to other places where there's more opportunities. But I love how natural it is, and it should be treasured the way that it is. Whakarongo mai ko te awa o tumtu mili minanya whakarongo
And
mai.
are you finding that your kids are keen on the idea of learning Maori?
So that's quite a big question, because my husband and I have a blended family of 6 children. Mm-hmm. So 5 of them still live in Melbourne, our older children, and we only have our 6-year-old son Zane here in Tasmania, because my husband was born here in Australia. He's actually 5th generation convict connection. So his family have lived here for that long. I would say Zane is very open to it because I've exposed it to him. But with my older children, I was in a very different phase of my life where my culture wasn't a priority. Relearning my language wasn't a priority, and the systems built around us didn't prioritise them either. So when I was younger, it wasn't cool to be Māori.
Okay.
Yeah, if that's the easiest way I can put it. It wasn't cool to be Māori, it wasn't cool to speak Māori. My father's generation, for example, grew up in schooling where you weren't allowed to talk your language in public, you weren't allowed to talk your language at school. You had to learn the ways of the Pākehā, of the European.
And so to what extent were you exposed then to Maori culture when you were growing up? Was it just through your grandmother?
Yes, definitely. It was through my father had a lot of trauma around his upbringing. So his father went to fight in war, and when he came back, he was quite damaged, and he used, this is where the alcoholism stems from in our family lines. So he used alcohol as a coping mechanism, and then therefore my father learnt to use alcohol as a coping mechanism. And we grew up with a heavy influence of alcohol around us from my father's side of the family. And quite often my mother and father would fight over the use of alcohol in our home because it presented unsafe situations in our happy childhood that we did grow up in.
And, how long did it take for you to sort of change all that and get rid of some of the toxic influences?
It took me a while, to be honest. It's one of those things where you don't just do something and then it changes. It's phases of transitions, if you like. And I truly, even in my relationship with my husband, we've had transitions and phases that, our bodies naturally reject these things when you're so used to living another way. Coming to terms with not having the nicer things in life, for example, because richness can look very different to my husband as opposed to what it looks like to me. I could live in a one-bedroom home and be happy just living off the land. That's how I was raised. But with him, he needs comfort. So we have to meet each other in that partnership of deciding, where are we now, sort of checking in. So I've had to do that my whole life. And I would say I reached that point only a couple of years ago, to be honest, about 3 years ago. I'm 44 now, so it wasn't until in my 40s that I feel that I truly reached that point of knowing what I want, knowing where I want to go, and knowing what my purpose was.
Yeah, often it takes till we're middle-aged to discover ourselves and to become more comfortable with.
Yeah, and the difficult thing about that is, especially when you've had older children, because you've brought them up in a certain phase of your life where I was toxic, I was attracting toxic, so they saw trauma through their eyes. So that's something where, as a parent, when you do go through that, awakening, you look back and you go, oh no, what about my children that have gone through this as well? So I've come to the realisation that, as they become adults, I'll be ready for them when they come and see me. That's how I look at it. I can't heal them. Everyone can only heal themselves. But when they're ready to come and talk to me about the specifics of what they saw or what they went through, then I'll be there ready to listen. Whakarongo mai ki ngā iwi take take, whakarongo mai ko te
At what point did you start to reconnect with that heritage, and how did that happen?
I would say the big turning point for me of fully reconnecting with my culture and my language would have been during COVID. So having 6 children in a home and trying to living in Melbourne, which was one of the most locked down places at that time. We were quite restricted in what we could do, where we could go, even the work that we done. So at that time I was actually working in IT for many years for NAB Bank. So I was very fortunate to have a job that could translate to working from home and still generate an income. But just the logistics of trying to organise children on various Zoom calls and, the noise everywhere in the home, it was quite a lot. It was quite overwhelming. And then at that time, I also went through some health issues. So I actually had in the back of my neck, in my C15, I had a tumour. Right. So during that time, I couldn't see specialists. We didn't have access to get things that I needed, and What it triggered in me was returning to, the ways of how our people would treat themselves without Western medicine. That's actually what started my journey back to rediscovering my culture, reconnecting with my language, was not having anywhere to turn, basically.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. And looking at what my ancestors would have done when they didn't have Western medicine there to help them, or specialists to go and see and tell them what they needed to do. So I had to basically become my own internal healer.
What about in terms of the language and other aspects of the culture? Was like the language something you always kept going, or did you find that that also triggered more, interest and connection with the culture in general?
Yeah, so what I've come to learn now is that all Māori are fluent in our language. There's just different levels of fluency. So with that language, because of colonisation, comes a lot of trauma behind it as well. It's quite painful to reconnect and relearn the language because of growing up being told that it wasn't cool to be Māori, speaking that language will get you nowhere. Those types of systemic, attitudes, they were quite deeply embedded in our culture. So after I went through that realisation of being my own internal healer, it really drew me into spaces. It opened up the door to online spaces, for example, where I could start learning the language. And from then on, I've been in language classes on a weekly basis, and depending on my levels of fluency as they grow.
So what opportunities exist now for speaking or learning Maori in that kind of
there's
space?
so many resources out there now. So through the revitalisation of our language, which happened in the 80s, through the Kohanga Reo movement that my grandmother was involved in, it has, created funding and resources through the education system for that to become part of the curriculum, for example, in New Zealand, whereas we didn't have that when we were younger at that age. It was something that if you wanted it, you had to go out and find it. But now, as an adult, there are so many online spaces, Te Wānanga o Aotearoa, Te Wānanga o Rakawa, and my language class that I'm in is called Te Wahi. So that is led by a friend Pania. I've been in that group for 2 years online. We meet every Friday online. And there are various people in that group, not necessarily all Māori.
Okay.
So there's definitely a lot of people wanting to learn about the Māori culture that aren't Māori as well, and learn the language so that they can, for example, communicate with people in Aotearoa that are Māori. Since I've reconnected to my culture and my language, I'm also matakite. So matakite in my culture is a seer or a visionary. So I have an ancestral connection with spirit. So through connecting with my culture and my language, I've been able to create a closer connection with my ancestral spirits. And that was very evident after I received my moko kauai, which is my marking on my chin just over a year ago. It was almost like an instantaneous opening for me in realisations and remembrance. Because my husband is, his ancestral lineage is Scottish Scandinavian. When I first met him 10 years ago, because we met 10 years ago, I had a first husband and then I met my second husband, Daniel. He used to introduce himself as Tasmanian. And I used to say to him, but where are you from? Where are your roots from? And it was a very painful, traumatic question for someone who doesn't know where they're from. And I can certainly resonate with that, being disconnected from my culture. So it's taken him many years to, in his own time, look at where he's from, because that's important to me, lineage, because I've had a son with Daniel. So it's very important for me to know where my son is from as well, on his father's side, to teach my son that side of him as well. Daniel now tells everyone he has Scottish Scandinavian, fifth generation convict connection here in Tasmania. So, but that doesn't disregard him being what he would say Tasmanian or Australian at all. It just connects him closer to who he truly is and where he's from. Whakarongo mai ki ngā iwi take take, whakarongo mai ko
So
te
tell me
talo.
a bit more about what you're doing now and some of the practices that you're involved with.
Yes, so I'm actually living my passion right now. Over the last few years in Melbourne, I worked for others in the healing spaces there, so in traditional Māori healing. But here in Tasmania, I've been able to curate my own space to work in. So I'm a Māori practitioner. Māori means life force energy in my culture. I have a studio that I lease in Ferntree, just under Mount Kunani there.
Oh, yeah.
And people book in to come and see me on Sundays for bodywork, spiritual guidance, and energetic work through their bodies. So I get all sorts of people come through. Of course, I get Māori come through, but predominantly the people that I get come through for my sessions are not Māori at all. They're from other cultures, trying to just find a way to reconnect with their own, basically. There are a lot of Māori people scattered around Tasmania, and a lot of them have lived here for many generations. So I'm involved with an organisation, probably one of the main organisations for New Zealanders online here, Kiwis in Tasmania Association. They call them KITA as the acronym, and they were involved with the Wooden Boat Festival, for example, and asked the cultural group from Melbourne, Ngā Mātou Purua, to travel over for that. So they are the ones that will bring in people through events or gatherings. Especially, living in Melbourne for 17 years, 5 years before moving here, I worked quite a lot in the healing spaces there through festivals and community gatherings with First Nations people as well. And even moving from Melbourne to here, there's different tikanga, there's different protocol for the First Nations here. So I can't make that assumption that what they do in Naarm is the same as what they do here.
Yeah.
So that is something that I'm definitely trying to figure out how I can contribute more to that community as well, in the First Nations community, because they do need the support here. For example, I attended the First Nations rally that was held at Parliament Lawns in Hobart a few weeks ago, and that was my first exposure to I guess being around the Palawa people. Like I've met a few people here and there through acknowledgement to country, welcome to country, those sorts of things. But yeah, it was just a real eye-opener to see, I guess, the pain that they're still experiencing. But to sit in it and just to listen was really important to me. I actually wrote a chant about it with my son, because I took my 6-year-old son along to that, and the main reason for that was really just to listen, because sometimes you feel like you don't know what to do. You don't know if it's your place to say anything or do anything, so you listen. So that was really important for my son to come with me and just listen to the storytelling, listen to the truth telling. That's all. You don't have to do anything with it, just listen. Whakarongo mai ki o mātua tūpuna, whakarongo ai ki ngā wai. So another part of work that I do is land and property realignments. So a lot of people in Melbourne would call me out to do house cleansings, but I don't look at them as house cleansings. I look at it as though there's trauma within the land, because we view the land as Papa Tuanuku, our earth mother. She's our ancestral mother. So when there's trauma in our mother, that will filter out to everything on top of her, above her, within her. So the work that I do with land and property realignment is similar to what I do on the body of a person, but in the land.
So the people who want you to do that, they're Maori as well?
No, so I've actually had no Māori that have called me out to do the land and property realignments. All of the people so far that have called me out to do these within Tasmania have been non-Māori or Pākehā from New Zealand. Well, most of the people that have called me out, they've gone through various other channels first. So they've had priests out, for example, to, do their blessings and scriptures, and they've just gotten to a point where they feel like something's here. But in reality, it's a lot of the time, it's a lot of physical things that impact the energy of a property. So I deep dive into the ley lines of the land, negative, positive ley lines, the location of EMFs, for example, which people don't see, but it's everywhere around us. And that's why I love Tasmania so much, because I can connect a lot clearly here, because we are not consumed by EMFs around us and the buzzing that most people can't hear, the constant buzzing of energy.
I suppose this particularly applies to your youngest. But what do you want to pass on to your kids? Like what are the main things that you think are important, especially, I guess, given your heritage and culture?
That's a big question. Not being scared to be who they are, and however that looks. Being kind to themselves through the different phases of their life. I think growing up, I wasn't told that we evolve through the different versions of ourselves, and every version of ourselves that we experience leads us to where we are, at any moment in time. So I just want my children to know that wherever they are, it's okay. It's not permanent. You can shift through that, and we can, move through life, different versions of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, embrace every version. Don't regret any version of yourself, because that version of yourself leads you to where you are now. So the name of this chant is called Whakarongo, which means listen in my native tongue, Te Reo Māori. In English, it translates to listen to the calling, listen to the call, listen to Earth Mother, listen to the land. Listen to Mount Wellington, Mount Kunani, listen to the mountain. Listen to the river Derwent, Tim Tumili Mananya, listen to the river. Listen to the First Nations people, listen to the Palawa. Listen to the ancestors, listen to the spirits. Listen, listen, listen. Whakarongo mai ki te karanga, whakarongo mai ki te karanga. Whakarongo mai ko papatua nuku, whakarongo mai ki te whenua. Whakarongo mai ki te maunga kunani, whakarongo mai ki te maunga. Whakarongo mai ko te awa o Tim Tumili Mananya, whakarongo mai ki te awa. Whakarongo mai ki ngā iwi take take, whakarongo mai ko te Palawa. Whakarongo mai ki o mātua tūpuna, whakarongo ai ki ngā wairua. Whakarongo, whakarongo, whakarongo.